Speaking of a trial in which testifying as the defendant was an absolute must, and I think it couldn't have gone any better, Kim Potter. So I've been watching this through Rekieta, who's been covering it and doing his best to make it interesting, but that prosecution could have put an insomniac to sleep. Um, the prosecution, okay, everybody knows Kim Potter is the one who pulled out her real firearm, thinking it was a taser, when an individual with a crime record an inch thick was resisting arrest, getting into a car, driving off, pulled out what she thought was her taser. It was her gun, said taser, 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 shot the guy. He ended up crashing and dying. She afterwards sobbing, I'm going to jail, I'm going to jail, I meant to pull my gun, yada, yada. She's standing trial now. And, that's the case for the prosecution, but they belabored the prosecution for days on end. Defense comes up. They call an expert who, from what I understand, I didn't watch the expert testimony, but Robert, did you see the expert testimony?
No, but Andrew Branca described him as the Chuck Norris of self-defense experts.
So, and Branca has been on Rekieta. They've been covering it. Apparently, he was so good and so effective and so decisive compared to the prosecution's meandering expert that amazing. But then Kim Potter comes up and testifies, and I mean, I've seen highlights. Sincere, honest woman who, unblemished record, trusted by her colleagues, was put in a situation where she feared for the lives of her colleagues, tried to go with a less lethal or a non-lethal method of detainment, and just effed up in the heat of the moment, the way it could happen to anybody, the way you pour salt into your coffee instead of sugar. Was believable and credible. I mean, how do you feel about the trial? How do you feel that it went, and what's your prediction for the outcome?
About as well as it could have gone for the defense. There's still an open question about whether the judge makes clear to the jury what criminal recklessness is, that it requires a subjective element. It's not purely objective. It's not clear whether she'll make that clear. Essentially, what the state proved was maybe a negligence case, but the problem with even that aspect is that there was testimony from the state's own witnesses that lethal force could have been used under these circumstances. So it's like, okay, she chose to not use her gun, but she was legally entitled to use her gun. Then it's not even a negligence case. It's not negligent if you choose to use a less lethal method of force when you could have used a fully lethal method of force. So, I mean, that was pointed out by some defense lawyers prior to the case beginning, that they thought this case was very weak because there was evidence from the state's own witnesses, as it turned out, that in fact, several police officers' lives were at risk if she didn't use force. And that means she could have used lethal force. And so that's part one. It's like, it's not even a negligence case. And then part two is, even if you assume that somehow she couldn't use lethal force, she clearly could have used non-lethal force. And then it's just a question of, was it criminal recklessness to pull the gun instead of a taser? But I think it comes down, the evidence was overwhelming that she had no bad history. She came across as, I think from most people's perspective, as sympathetic. And that the defense expert was much, much, much better than the prosecution's expert. This defense expert will be in high demand after this case. Apparently, he does all his criminal cases pro bono. He only charges for civil cases. Has a ridiculous history. Wrote the rules in a lot of cases.
So that nobody accuses you, Robert, or I of being having a double standard. Where at one point we did say, experts testifying for free could cause you to question the motivations. They might be so emotionally attached that they are no longer credible. This expert's explanation for why he does all cases for free. He's done them for free.
That's the big difference. If you are just doing pro bono in this case, that raises red flags. If you always do pro bono in criminal cases, then okay, that's interesting. And that just means you pick your cases that you agree with and that you are willing to be an expert in. Because I mean, my guess is they may have approached him for Chauvin and he turned it down. So so this one was one that basically all the police officers who testified don't think she should be getting prosecuted. They think that she saved their lives. The ones that were at risk. The ones that knew her all vouch for her. No history of complaints of any kind. So this is not unlike Chauvin, who had a long history of resorting to excessive force when he was in a state of fear or worry. She had just the opposite. No history of that at all. Only positive compliments and the rest. And so the only question to me was the same question as from the beginning of the case, which is, can you find an impartial jury in the Twin Cities because I don't know if you can. This case will show it. If she gets convicted, it means it's not possible for a police officer to get an impartial jury in the Twin Cities right now.
It is. Well, and also just to point out one thing that was very clear from the trial, which is why the prosecution went on forever about this. They brought in an expert. Let me just make sure everyone sees that. An expert, a video expert. He wasn't even supposed to be an expert. It was the dude who investigated the case, who watched the videos. And they were asking this individual, where are the police officers positioned now in respect of the car? Because they wanted this guy who did nothing more than watch the videos to testify as to where the police officers were in respect of the car that Daunte Wright, with his criminal history, which was not admitted into evidence as far as I understood, I'll ask you about that in a second, they wanted to show that these cops were not in any immediate harm. As of when Daunte Wright was getting into his car, resisting arrest, and driving off with doors open, they're like, oh, your shoulders weren't in the car. They went on for a day with this. Your shoulders were not in the car. Can you see that from the video, Monsieur whomever? And they were trying to prove that in that it's the same Binger idiocy, like in that nano split second of a freeze frame of a video that you are looking at that you weren't there for, their shoulders weren't in the car, therefore they weren't at risk of getting dragged off. So even using the taser wouldn't have been. It lacked credibility as far as a proposition went, but they went on for it for so long. I think it turned everybody off with half a brain. Like you say, I mean, what went into jury selection? They had a very thorough jury selection in this case, right? Like 2 weeks.
And they did, but I think in a case like this, you need to poll the jury pool in advance and see whether they're capable of being impartial. And to my knowledge, that was never done. And so that's why I think that it's not as bad as the Chauvin case in the sense of pretrial publicity and prejudice, but it's still the Twin Cities. And, this happened during the middle of Chauvin deliberations, this incident. So I just think it's a problem, potentially. We'll find out, because most of the lawyers who have observed it think it's definitely, even, a range of criminal defense lawyers that don't have any political affiliation of any kind, didn't have any, preconceptions about the case, have said on a wide range of legal shows that they think she should get acquitted. So only a bad jury or the impossibility of getting a good jury in the Twin Cities, in my view, results in anything other than an acquittal. My guess is the media will, if there's an acquittal, the media will probably try to pretend it didn't happen because they misled people about this case.
Well, speaking of being misled, actually, Robert, and again, I had no idea as to how bad Daunte Wright's criminal history was. And this is one of those cases where it again perfectly illustrates the relevance of the criminal history. In Rittenhouse, the criminal histories of JoJo, the P word, were not relevant to Rittenhouse because he didn't know. So it didn't factor into his assessment like, oh, this dude has a very disgusting, violent criminal history. I should approach it with more caution. He just knew the guy was behaving wacky. What was the other one where it did matter? Oh, well, in this case, for example, the cops did know about this individual's violent criminal history and apparently a long rap sheet, repeat attempts at resisting arrest. In fact, I believe he had a warrant out for resisting arrest, or they knew his criminal history at the time they were doing this, which factors into their decision-making at the time, compared to Rittenhouse. Where I say Rittenhouse still was relevant for general consumption was that it would change people's perspective as to how they digest all of this if they know JoJo's history versus him, and Huber being painted as saints and like religious-like figures. Same thing in this case. Above and beyond being relevant to the decision-making at the time, it would have been relevant to society digesting this story properly. But Daunte Wright's criminal history, unless I'm mistaken, was not allowed in as evidence in this trial?
Not all of it, but sufficient part of it. In other words, the fact they had an outstanding warrant for gun issues did come in, and they all highlighted the nature of the stop, the location of the stop, and his proven history that they knew of. Just that aspect made him a very high-risk arrest and a high-risk individual. So that's why they were very tense in the whole thing and knew there were going to be major problems. And in truth, if the cop had been more aggressive in exercising force and physically arresting him, he's alive. The cop tried because they were exercising the least possible force, that things escalated the way they did because that allowed him to escape.
It's almost like the indirect curse or the indirect negative results of putting too much pressure on cops not to use the force they think is warranted, because you'll go after them. And something tells me, Robin, we'll never know, but had she used the lethal force intentionally, as justified as it might have been, would probably still be standing trial regardless.
Yes.
But people need to appreciate that in Rittenhouse, criminal history was not relevant for his actions that night. In this case, it was, because they knew, and it affected the way they approached him. But from a public opinion perspective, had the media reported on Daunte Wright's criminal history, just so that people could understand what the cops were dealing with, it was not an angelic, innocent victim. The dad's visiting him in the hospital. Daddy, why they do this? But they don't. And so the general public, myself included, says, okay, I thought it was negligent to have made the mistake. Then I saw that the taser and the firearm looked uncomfortably similar. And then I get to know what the cops knew at the time, that this guy was had a violent criminal history, which might explain why they reacted the way they did. But media doesn't report that, so people are misinformed or ill-informed. Okay, so you're predicting all things go the way you think they should, acquittal in Potter.
Yeah. I mean, an honest jury definitely acquits. I just don't know whether that's possible in Minneapolis.
All right, now, my prediction, so everyone's out there, I think she should get acquitted as well. I think she will get acquitted. I'm not going to weigh my words there. If I wanted to look smart based on the unlikelihood of the decision, I would say that I'm not so confident anymore in Maxwell, but I believe she should get convicted, but I believe a lot of other people should as well. It's not going to happen. What was the third one of the week? So Potter, sorry, actually, Potter has gone to jury for are they in deliberation?
No.
Or
I believe closing arguments are Monday.
Okay, that'll be interesting. Watch that on Rekieta, people. Rekieta has been doing an amazing job making it as interesting and watchable as possible. And I pop in every now and again, but the last week of my life has been probably as it's going to be the same as the next 3 weeks of my life, because Canada.